All right. Welcome to the final reading of this year's Tabula Poetica series. This afternoon, we celebrate the work of our MFA students who wrote poetry together this semester and made for a really fantastic mix of voices and approaches. Please take a moment to turn off your cell phone. As you're doing that, I want to thank some of the people and organizations that make Tabula Poetica possible. Most of the support for this project comes from the English department, and I especially want to thank our department chair, Joanna Levin, and my two graduate assistants, David Krausman and Erica Hoffmeister. All three of them are in their final exam right now, and aren't we glad we're here instead? I also want to thank our administrative assistants, Debbie Thacker and Kristen Laxo. They handle all the logistics for scheduling, facilities, and the amazing media services recording this reading. A lot of people contribute time and energy to making this series work. Leatherby Libraries and Fish Interfaith Center, where we are now, continue to be great hosts for our events. This year, to help bring the visiting poets to campus, we also had support from the Dean of Students Office and the Department of History. We are grateful, as always, for small grants from poets and writers through a grant that they received from the James Irvine Foundation. Claudia Emerson was scheduled as part of the Tabula Poetica series this fall. When I invited her, she was already ill, and I told her we'd play it by ear. She was unable to make the cross-country trip, but this MFA group of students and I read, discussed, and even imitated Claudia's work this semester. I first met Claudia at Sewanee Writers Conference, where she and I hit it off. That's also where I first met Richard Bausch, who's now become part of our faculty. Claudia and I actually hit it off because we had a shared interest in nuclear history, which I didn't expect to find in a poet. We kept in touch mostly via Facebook. In fact, as the result of one of her Facebook posts and the comments that followed that post, I suggested that she, another poet named Lisa Faye Cootley, who was also at Sewanee when we were there, and I write a conversation essay together. Lisa Faye and I remain deeply grateful to have had that public conversation about journals, which appeared in Poets and Writers this fall, with Claudia Emerson. A lot of people knew Claudia far longer and far better than I did. When she signed a copy of her Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Late Wife, for me, she wrote, "We must be friends," a promise I hope I've kept despite the short time we knew each other. That statement also reflects her approach to other people, always looking for the connection she might already have with them. As most of you know, Claudia Emerson very recently passed away. We want to dedicate this reading today to Claudia and also to her husband, Kent Ippolito. I'll begin this reading with a couple of poems by Claudia. This is a poem from her Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Late Wife. It's called The X-Rays. By the time they saw what they were looking at, it was already risen into the bones of her chest. They could show you then the lungs were white with it. They said it was like salt in water, that hard to see as separate, and would be that hard to remove. Like moonlight dissolved in fog in the dense web of vessels. You say now you kept them longer than you should have, those shadow photographs of the closed room of her body, while you wandered around inside yourself as though inside another room she had abandoned to her absence, to barren light and air, the one indistinguishable from the other. And the second poem I'll read by Claudia Emerson is a newer poem, and it's called Metastasis Worry Moth. Yours is not the majestic gypsy, the coddling Luna wax, or grander Atlas, with the appetite of a plague, entire fields succumbing to them, whole generations of bees. This is the unseen, closeted, unassuming gray that seeks out last winter's cloth, another season, drawn to the body's scent, what was its heat, to consume early that scant, much of you, fragile, lace-like, the constellate erasures of the coat it made for you to wear. And now I will introduce our first MFA reader, Alexis Goebel.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to start by reading Claudia Emerson's poem, Frame and Epistle. Most of the things you made for me, blanket, chest, lap desk, the armless rocker, I gave away to friends who could use them and not be reminded of the hours lost there. Not having been witness to those designs, the tedious finishes, but I did keep the mirror, perhaps because I like all mirrors. Most of these years it has been invisible, part of the wall, or defined by a reflection, safe, because reflection, after all, does change. I hung it there in the front dark hallway of this house you never see, so that it might magnify the meager light, become a lesser backward window. So one pauses long enough for it. But this morning, as I put on my overcoat, then straightened my hair, I saw outside my face its frame you made for me, admiring for the first time the way the cherry you cut and planed yourself had darkened, just as you said it would. Okay. Next, I'm going to read one of my poems. It's called Dear Poem. I'm sorry, but I cannot use you. I have broken your line breaks one too many times for the seizures to breathe and have touched your white space in all the wrong places. Your editing process is extreme, and I am too impatient. Your off rhymes are so off, like off Broadway, and your dactyls are slowing down the general syntax. You poem dactyl you'll make my tongue fly off during a reading as if you were a senryu. Your melodramatic, romantic prose is drawn out. You chanson de geste. Your continual repetition is very bleak, and there's so much confusion within your sections. I've used my thesaurus one too many times, and with your ottava rima lines and one-line flaws, I cannot tell one stanza from the other. You'll go into my unorganized files to talk about how badly I treated you, altered you or beat you with overly overt phrasing, with all of the other unfit misfits, your new friends, and brood over bad grammar and almost sonnets. You may call me an assonance, a one-note poet, but poem, I've really had it with you. Even with my best edits, you never could have won. You lack all poise, movement, and charm. I've really had it. That's it. We're done. And that's it. Thank you. Next is Adriana.
Hello. I'm going to read Cold Room by Claudia Emerson, if I can find it. Cold Room. Her refrigerator full, my mother has stored some things in the cold of my brother's closed-off room. Christmas oranges and pears on the floor, the salt-cured ham that hung for a full year from the cellar rafters, cooked now and kept on the chest of drawers. He is far away and ill, she knows. He will not come home, suspects. She will not see or hold him again in the flesh. Allowed him only in smiling photographs, undone by a voice thin on the phone. Afternoons, she climbs the slow, complaining stairs with a platter and carving knife. She wears her winter coat, opens the door to his bed still made, stale light, the scent of ripe fruit and cold smoke. Here in the room, let go for this. She concentrates on carving, the meat so even and thin she can see through it, to the blade, its clean practice passage. Just so, she says as though to no one, just so. And I will now read some of my poems. Huera. In a neat pocket of LA, Grandpa's store stands, holds up against the weight of decades of dust and graffiti. He sold more liquor than anything else and kept the fridge stocked tight and cold with beer and soda. There was also Mexican candy, tamarindos and elotes. My brother and I thought it lucky to have a grandfather who dealt in candy for a living. La tienda, with its unsealed concrete floor, was where my brother and I played jacks, leaned on dark elbows to draw crooked lines that forked into the family we were. Mijita, Grandpa would yell in quick Spanish, and I would come carrying an item from a low shelf. Much later, he came to visit. I asked, prodding uncomfortably, while waiting for my Spanish tongue to kick in, how he met Grandma. He would not answer, insisted that I asked too many questions. He asked for more sweetbread, pan dulce, and cafecito. As his thumb and pointer fingers shook into the stiff groove of a mug, he asked me what I was studying in college. English, I responded. But don't you know it so well already? And this is Allegory of the Cave. Shadows along the concrete divide edge from seam. Let nothing breach the tendrils of fingers interlocked in shape only. The thin stretch of a child's limbs along the street, gliding along a manhole cover, reaching for her mother's darkness. Following the light like a child, I curve my back against the light of sound, against rock and hold, my own fiery shape. How like fog we are, like dreams, dream of another landscape, another shape your body's warmth might take. And I will do this one. The first house was the house that felt small when Dad came home and where the crowns of crows would stalk on the lawn. One of my first memories. I am pushing a toy car along the driveway like I do every day. I am 3. I bend too close to the ground, slip, and scuff my nose. I run inside and Dad is cleaning, always cleaning, but he picks me up and lays me on the couch, angry that I've hurt myself. Later, I walk into my parents' bedroom and find him yelling at Mom. She begs me to come to her, a little girl saving her mother. A policeman comes to the door, pops his head in the doorway for a second, leaves. I cannot imagine being that girl who could not speak English and then could not speak. How many moons exactly? I drive, examining the crows along the sway of a power line, while on Missouri Street, a little blue house stands with a rust ring on the porch where Dad used to sit on an empty paint can. And this is my last poem. It's called Olive Evening. Small sounds along the length of a tired breath. I pressed olive evenings on fresh wood, the strange smile just turning promising before I left, emptied along the hallway. And the next reader is Marta Bistram.
Hello. I'm going to begin by reading a poem from Claudia Emerson's Secure the Shadow. It's called Namesake. While still a child, he sensed his name, spoken, shouted, whispered, laughed, and called, and called and called, was not fully his, having been first his grandfather's, someone his mother remembered only as a child would. Her seat at the table his lap, his death when she was 9, Or through weary stories the aunts told and retold, memories the stuff of patterned lace, fragile, impractical, but lasting. So, though he had come to himself in the familiar clearing of it, he had learned that every time he answered or refused its voicing over his shoulder, the name was not all he had to share, but also its early vanishing, and that when he did appear, he was near revenant and at once perishing, impossible disappointment, and he could not know whom to rage against, the one who called, the one who could not come. Okay, I'm going to read some of my own poems now. I'm going to start out with one called Oświęcim, 2009. I am sorry for the tender hands that touched these bricks, for all their empty clutching. Step carefully, my feet disturb the ghosts of shoes I will see in irreverent piles, all sizes. I resist the urge to kick these rails, so fragile now, so easily defeated. We pick the English tour for your sister, but I already know it is easier this way. Będzie dobrze. My grandmother sweats, hates the Germans, complains that the guide speaks too quickly. Za szybko. But everything is slow here, muted in cement, or buried with the saturated sadness. Grass? Nothing should grow here. There is too much in the ground. Okay, next up I have a poem called Reading Dublin. 1. My sneakers sank into the mud as we stared at the old penny face of Oscar Wilde. He didn't like this place. It took me all day to find him, and he never liked this place. 2. We followed the bottle caps along the Liffey until the messages ran out. A group of men on a bench called out to us for money. 3. The puddles in the streets reached my ankles. St. Patrick's Cathedral was closed, so we splashed to a red cafe that smelled like newspaper and read a book of world records from 2001. The bird on the cover is now extinct. 4. I learned the word jail. We stood in line behind other Americans. The damp cells made us cold, so we trooped across the street for tea. I did not want to talk about the bloody letters. 5. Samuel Beckett's bridge is close to the Dubliner's house. Molly Malone glows by the flower stand with cheap peonies. The famine statues rise out of the concrete. I felt them behind me when I left. And the last poem I'm going to read is called, The Animals, Us. 1. I found a cat. Patchy fur, sickly gaze. Trembling on paws rooted to the silty mud as if washed ashore. 2 steps closer, he shifted, fearing. Everything I said was wrong. My hand, the offering. I needed to understand isolation, this rain. A car door slammed wetly. 2. My mother said there were deer by the swimming pool. I followed her down stone paths, slippery with dew, listened to the foreign clang of the gate. Tiptoeing, we found ourselves alone. Tuscan mountains, clouds, grapes, and inhale. All we did was breathe. Okay, it's my great pleasure to introduce my classmate, Matt Taylor. Thank you.
Afternoon. It's a tough act to follow, huh? Therefore, I'm going to let Claudia Emerson follow. I ascertained that Claudia was a great student of history, as Anna said, and this poem has a lot to do with that, which is why I selected it. It's called Great Depression Story. Sometimes the season changed in the telling, sometimes the state, but it was always during the Depression, and he was alone in the boxcar, the train stalled beneath a sky wider than any he'd seen so far, the fields of grass wider than the sky. He'd been curious to see if things were as bad somewhere else as they were at home. They were, and worse, he said, places with no trees, no water. He hadn't eaten all day, all week, his hunger hard fixed, doubled, gleaming as the rails. A lone house broke the sharp horizon, the train dreaming beneath him. So he climbed down, walked out, the grass parting at his knees. The windows were open, curtainless, and the screen door, unlatched, moved to open too when he knocked. He could see in all the way through to the kitchen, and he smelled before he saw the lidded pot on the stove, the steam escaping. Her clothes moved on the line for all reply, the sheets, a slip, one dress, washed thin, worn to translucence. Through it, he could see what he mistook for fields of roses until a crow flew in with the wind. Sudden, fleeting seam. By the time he got back to the train, he'd guessed already what he'd taken, pot and all. A hen, an old one that had quit laying, he was sure, or she wouldn't have killed it. The train began to move then, her house falling away from him. The story ended with the meat not quite done, but believe him, he ate it. All white and dark, back, breast, legs, and thighs, strewing the still warm bones behind him for miles. This is a poem called Anima, not enema, but anima. Josh likes that one. The last half melon of a late August night, intersected, bloodshot, opened as an eye, glows like sunset even in the half-light that I eat the melon by. Whorls wound tight as walnut burls wreathe seeds which won't take root in spite of childhood warnings, in flesh as pink as sunburn, rich, now cool as winter mornings. The simplest demonstration of the trouble of the body. One thing must eat another. The cutting edge stay bloody. To cleave is both to join and sever. But what then if no root may spring from all the seed I've scattered as a lover? No matter. I will eat, myself become swollen as a mother. I get through the B-roll here and get to the good stuff. This is called Open Window Hospital Bed. As though the thumb had listened years for its cue, the saw's tune precisely severed, a sound like zilch, ecstatic burst, a blossom of gore. Pleasure is the fog, misery the buried river. Pain is to wag as to dog, tongue, song, as arrow, quiver, if only fingers could be counted on. Go on, think of death. Think of new grass sipping, gentle, all, name, thumb, breath, you, as a child dead, live in your memory, sipped at honeysuckle, bloodshot flower, spreading, thinning, food your being, food the body, you, and all of it now, all of it the thing most finely fair, just as endlessly unsatisfied. The wind outside goes on, arranging the hillside's hair. And I think, if I might, I'm going to conclude with a new one, just because I've never heard it out loud myself. This is called Haircut. These are good poor people, these two, which is to say that they are good at being poor. In the courtyard of their rented cottage, in a kitchen chair, he stares, stooped like a gaucho in his gaban, blade at his back, a rider in the rain with a long way to go. This is summer. Sweat bibs her underarms, and his bristles, freed now, airborne like a drift of spore, cling to the dew of her. Each loves the other. They are lovers. I take it they are lovers by the way he droops and she hovers. Thank you. Would you help me welcome Kelsey Prado, please?
So first, I'm going to read a poem by Claudia Emerson as well, and this one is called Early Elegy, Headmistress. The word itself, prim, retired, its artifact her portrait above the fireplace, on her face the boredom she abhorred, then perfected, her hands held upward, their emptiness a revision, cigarette and brandy snifter painted intolerably out. To leave her this lesser gesture, what next? Or shrugged, whatever. From the waist down, she was never there. So that's that. So I'm gonna shuffle my papers for a minute, and then I'm gonna read two of my poems. So let me see. So the first one I'm reading is called Living in Suspension. So write the way as you would write about the tongues of serpents and agonies of cats. Are you happy reading and pretending you're you? The brain has tiny feet, you know. It functions like an insect. They shall inherit the garden, the insects. Finger bones broken in an otherwise wilderness. The serpent snares a mind, whispering answers under the loud and constant transformation from air to human body. Falling air is the breath that washes us into existence. Are you here? How could you be when the beetle has done more with its tiny feet than you have? Under the apple tree, can you stretch your broken bones toward the fruit? Is light the only thing you're waiting for? And then the last one I'm going to read is called Stanzas to a Girl in New York. Not in a million years, you said, with licorice eyes, cocaine wide, and scared of sleeping on the cold station floor. Cocaine tired, long past the red-eyed come down, a few beers and a little help from something else to make warm on the cold station floor. Honey tongue and tiny beehive heart humming against my chest, you want me to destroy the nest. I'm not that kind of guy. I really want to get high, and you have skin like Persian and lightning, and I think you'd enjoy it if you tried it. You're cold, so much colder than I am, curling and curling, black and void, into yourself, snapping black lightning on the old station floor. Welcome to the island of Eaten Lotus, says the graffiti. The janitor scowls and shuffles past. A police officer asks which train we're taking, and I say, the next one. There are no trains at 4 a.m., and for the first time tonight, I feel far away. I don't know how you feel or why you're here with me on the floor of Penn Station, but I'm glad you stayed this long. I should go to your promised apartment, but I'm not that kind of guy. What I mean is I'd rather get high, and besides, there are naked parts of me I don't think you're expecting. But New York is a jaded city, the city that's always never sleeping, always fiercely not expecting. How much do you care about naked parts? I'm afraid to ask, afraid of tiny stingers in your beehive heart. Home is colder than New York. I can sleep here in the smell of your lotus blossom hair, quaking with your winter shiver shaking. Thank you. And the next poet to read is Nick Dante.
Hello, I'm Nick Dante. I'm going to begin with a poem by Claudia Emerson called Biology Lesson. It seems impossible that there could be an ancestral link between the turtle, plodding, benevolent creature they keep in a glass terrarium, and any bird. But once the teacher suggests it, they begin to see. In the blunt beak stained with mulberry juice, the low brow, eyes, the scales on its legs, certain, if at first, strain resemblance, then, even in its poor posture, they are convinced of another sky into which it withdraws, not to become invisible, but to soar, fearless, inside itself, small dome of safe, starless heaven. And this next one is, actually I'm going to switch the order of this. This next one is called The Weight of the Thing. That spring, my daughter always brought me things she found in our garden the morning after the rain had fallen. Wet leaves, slick stones, dirty bits of feather or flower petals, long thin worms or loud stout toads, anything with a texture or a scent or a color she didn't yet know, Everything was still fresh and new to her. Curiosity was more tangible than loss. She would always want me to tell her a story, a reason why certain creatures look different and others the same. Why do snails have shells and slugs have none? And does the butterfly remember what she was before the change? I try my best to give exciting answers to this miniature version of my wife. A 4-year-old will believe just about any story you tell them, even if they know it's just make-believe. Her favorite garden treasure was a freckled eggshell she found before lunch on an overcast day. No rain had fallen, just heavy clouds. It was hidden behind thorns, beneath the center of a bougainvillea plant that climbed up the side of the house. She told me to close my eyes and put out my hand, and I complied with learned patience, feeling tiny cold hands deliver something even tinier, but more fragile. Then, a muffled giggle that grew as I opened my hand to find her prize. The egg was almost intact, with only a quarter-sized exit and a smear of film left, in haste, by the previous tenant. I could barely feel the weight of the thing, but I admired its soft, subdued blue, pale as boundless hydrangeas we used to have in the garden, or the color of the sinuous sundress her mother would wear around this time of year. I smiled and handed the little egg back to its new owner and told her I loved it, but not as much as I loved her. She giggled again, wildly this time. I took her hand and asked her what she wanted for lunch, already knowing the answer, as we walked into the house, fingers interlocked. And this last poem is called Radiometric Dating. At first, the earth was mostly liquid, overwhelmed by volcanoes and collisions with other bodies. Sitting in front of our tent on the beach, she cuddles up next to me on the blanket, and I feel her body's heat. Geologists say that over time, the planet formed a widening crust. I pull her close and watch the slow expansion of her pupils. Heat flow from the interior core fueled the turning of Earth's engine, creating endless vapor. She rises to stretch, and I put more wood on the fire. The primitive fog condensed into clouds. The clouds created oceans. Without a word, she smiles at me with wine-stained lips and climbs inside the tent. The oceans allowed life to exist, first below the surface, then on land. Pulling back the mesh door, I find her waiting for me in our sleeping bag. There was a rapid diversification of life, generations of plants and animals born with the instinct to multiply. When we're no longer breathless, she rests her head on my chest, and her chilly feet find mine. Today, there are many fossils of what occurred millions of years ago, records of Earth's most important events. We let the embers in the fire cool on their own, and listen to the waves crashing. Even in the dark, she can see my smile. Thank you. And your next poet is going to be Jenny Howard.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So first I'm going to read a poem by Claudia Emerson called The Porch. This is not illness, not yet dying. This stillness, a changed way of being here on the porch. 93, my father sits much as he always sat, still recognizable as himself. Baseball cap the same, rocking chair, the fly swatter. Old defense he holds but will not use. Its mesh, a small window screen keeping nothing away from him. The wrens have chosen again the glazed clay bird bottle he hung close under the shadowy eaves, and have more quickly accepted him. His presence so little to grow accustomed to as they fly back and forth, above and around him in ordinary industry. In their beaks, pieces of straw, tufts of moss or spider's web. They pause now and then to light on the clothesline, the downspout, the back of his rocker. When one wren grips the bill of his cap the way it will in a few minutes land on a dogwood branch, I understand that although I am as still as he is, and that such concentration is its own disappearance, the birds must sense the difference. His being so fully formed, it has become unquestioned part of the small landscape of their survival. Okay, 3 poems of mine now. First, I'll read Opiate. I own a sweater embellished by knots, lace, beads, an old tatty thing, a relic, I see these beads held apart by these knots linked by this lace, like planets, like galaxies. I wear it and think. I think these beads are like planets. These beads are like moments in time, like moments linked by the fabric of the universe, by verse after verse, and I am lost in revelry. Such a simple thing can thrust a mind far away. Such a simple thing can move me miles, can breathe images that coalesce into meaning. It is so easy, this meaning-making, because I crave pattern, story, truth. Second, I'm going to read less. I can't. She seemed unbothered by the thought that they might not come, that he might never be ready, that she too might not yearn as she should. I thought her selfish, maybe strange. My lens, parent-hued, my bias, family. I think about her now, the unbothered one, and I wish I could ask how she managed the questions, pressure, offensive, defensive, because all seem comfortable asking, ready to probe the deep crescents within me, certain I am lacking, am less than they. And last, I'm going to read Elm and Vine. 1. I, the vine that climbs, constricts, vine from wine, or is it of wine? I do wrap myself, circular, curling around the elm, you. I do know what it is to cling, but also to grow and adapt. You, the elm, do stand, unmoved. 2. Wine, intoxicant, sea, toxic. Is love that? Ecstasy in its many contexts? Stimulant, depressant, mostly addicting. Am I that to you? Thou art an elm, my husband, I a vine, whose weakness married to thy stronger state makes me with thy strength to communicate. Shakespeare. I do know, have known you. 3. We, two components of a single whole, do lean and blend, do become each other. But if, quoth he, this elm without the vine did single stand, it should have nothing saving leaves to be desired. Ovid. And what is strength if it is not this merging, this doubling of myself and yourself? If it is not that, how does one become stronger? I do not lose in merging, since you and I are one creature severed only in substance. And again, if that the vine which runs upon the elm had not the tree to lean unto, it should upon the ground lie flat. Ovid. I do know what marriage is. And that one's for my husband, Brandon. Thank you. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our final poet for the evening, Joshua Pritchard.
Thank you, Jenny. It occurs to me that I am the one person in your way between going out and having fun with your friends, having a few drinks, and being here, so I will try to make this painless. I thought I would actually read the poem I chose of Claudia Emerson's Last and have her have the last word. But I'll start with a poem that I feel was greatly influenced by Claudia. So this poem is called Po' Boy. On tiptoes, my mother reaches for a recipe book, spine cracked, blows dust off brittle pages, and deciphers old scratches, ancient symbols, divine, for fried catfish po' boys to eat on my visit home. Granny's thrift, written, shared, between the lines, her granny, knee-deep in muddy water, her fingers dug in fine silt under the belly of a whiskered fish, but felt here at the table now. My uncle, famished, wasted away, eats his mother, her labor, and spits out the bones. No one says a word when he loses a tooth in the cheese grits. In my own home, I visit, sleeping on the couch under a quilt stitched from my old baseball jerseys by my mother, whom I silently curse for making it too heavy with feeling. A gift from some poor Christmas. The real gift, more lasting, durable, was a lesson in the word debt, learning who to blame and how to blame in whispers, which I rehearsed expertly for years until I was underwater. On the porch, overgrown with morning glories rolled tight in the night, my young brother, still perpetually barefoot, with bare arms for a hug freely given, as is all his love, catches me with a cigarette. Swollen tears hold the belief that I'm already dead or dying, like Granny and her granny and our uncle. But brother doesn't speak. Like a good po' boy, he holds it in, puts his hands in muddy water, and feels. This next poem is called Palpitations, which I think I'm having right now, so I'll use that energy. The doctor says it's just palpitations, malfunction, extra pulse, in threes and threes. To me it feels like less, not more, a lost beat. I think now about stress and unstress, flapping chamber music. Hymns do nothing for the heart anymore, pointless prayers for rest. Improvise the rhythm, you old bebop drummer dropping bombs poised between the ribs, relishing defiance against classic time. I live now in softer sounds. Every silence between the notes whispers the known rumor, murmuring like spoken fine print. Listen. This last poem of mine is called Black Box. Here is a theory. Caterpillars sleep in crystalline dwellings hardened on their backs, hung, suspended in time, for a time, the common belief in wings sprouting from the body. Cracked open, priests of science discover a soup of cells, quiescent, believe dead, their perfect metaphor. This too solid flesh, it melts, thaws, and resolves itself. No more bellies inching, scraping the ground. Instead, ameliorates the air, and they marvel as it flutters by. Now better minds, still cruel, experiment with electric shocks, noxious gas, discover cells themselves, remember pain. Through the black box of cataclysm, an insect, rearrange, is still afraid, memory obsequious, imprinted in the DNA. So the poem of Claudia's that I'll read is called Daybook. And to me at least, it is about a poem about the fragments that we leave behind and how I think they're somehow insufficient. But as we've heard today, these are some pretty damn good fragments that we have left. So, Daybook. This is the season of her dying, and you have kept it, I find, underneath the stairs, in a box filled with photographs, her daybook of that last year, the calendar and narrative she did not intend to write. In the grid of days, I see her habit had been to record in pencil what might be erased, moved, saving the indelible black for what could not change. Your birthday, hers, your anniversary. And in that same decisive hand, the disease began to eclipse this order, but she erased nothing. Now from beneath the days the hospital claimed her first, latent words emerge, faint but certain, as images of ribs cradling milky lungs, the flesh forgotten, as water you can see through to the bottom. Thank you, guys.
Don't you hate it when there's a great ending and then the thing goes on? So that's what's going to happen now. I'm going to read a little bit from I'm going to read the last section of the last poem in Claudia Emerson's book, Figure Studies. And when I asked her to sign this book, she said something like, "Oh, that's so sweet. I didn't think anybody read that book." And I think it's easy for us as writers to get caught up in the process of being all by ourselves doing our work. And today is a celebration of the people who are on the other side of the process, on the other side of the page. So here's the last section of The Medical Venus. Both fixed and liquescent, this extreme, uneasy perfection can never forget itself the way bronze, granite, marble forget. This demands greater, almost human care, eager as it is to reject the suspense of exacting form and return to the possibilities of motion. And I read that section because I think what these 8 poets have done this semester is think about and write through the tension between exacting form and the possibilities of motion. And the reading today demonstrated that each of them tackled this tension, this struggle, but came up with something completely different. And so we heard an extraordinary variety of voices, approaches, obsessions perhaps, today among these 8 poets, and I just want to say thank you to them. This is why I keep teaching. So let's give them all a hand. Thank you all for coming, and I think we'll go celebrate now.